If you ever picked up a book labeled fantasy romance expecting a happily ever after, but ended up staring at the wall emotionally hollow, this video is for you. Because people keep confusing fantasy romance with romantic fantasy, and I'm tired of being lied to. Let's fix it. I'm Jessica. I write romance and read an irresponsible amount of both romantic fantasy and fantasy romance. And at this point, I can tell you exactly why readers are getting blindsided and how to stop it. Sometimes you want magic and an emotional payoff, and some other times you want to be devastated artistically, and those are not the same genre. The problem is that marketing has decided that those labels are the same, and they are not. Like, you sit down, get cozy with your book expecting fantasy romance like a fate prince kissing under the moonlight, a glowing forest, and then you end up sobbing because there's a revolution, your female character sacrificed herself for the good of the people, and the love interest never even confessed. And listen, that kind of book can be brilliant, absolutely, but it's a very different reading experience. Mood matters, expectations matter. Let's stop ambushing readers, please. Fantasy romance is the easy one. It's a romance story first. The relationship is the whole plot. If you take it out of the equation, the story dies. Fantasy romance has romantic tension. It has aggressive pining. It has a happily ever after or a happy for now. That's non-negotiable. If it doesn't have a happily ever after or a happy for now, it's not romance. It can be fantasy, but it's not romance. Fantasy romance says, yes, there's magic, yes, the world is on fire, but you will get your emotional payoff. Romantic fantasy is the other one. This is fantasy first. There's huge world building, there's politics, very intricate politics, there's maps, probably many of them, and somewhere in the middle of that, two characters fall in love. And do not convince yourself that this is a romance, because fantasy romance owes you a happily ever after, but romantic fantasy doesn't. So one or both of those people could die, so don't get attached. That's not a flaw, that's the genre. Romantic fantasy is allowed to stab you in the back and walk away humming. And here's my rule of thumb. It's messy, but it works. Ask yourself, what does this book want me to feel most satisfied by? If it's the relationship, then it's a fantasy romance. But if it's the world, the politics, the world building, the trauma, the fate, the destiny, then it's romantic fantasy. In fantasy, everything fights for page time. The politics, the magic, the prophecies, the side quests, the generational trauma. So the real question is, what can you take, what can you remove from the story without breaking it? If it's the romance and the story collapses, then it's fantasy romance. If it's the romance and the book says, anyway, here is the revolution and the world is on fire, then that's romantic fantasy. And there are plenty of books that trip readers over and over, like The Prairie of the Orange Tree. The romance is not the point, and it constantly gets marketed as a fantasy romance when it's a romance fantasy. The world building, the politics, the religion, the dragons, those are the point, not the couple. If you read it for the couple, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But if you read it for the world, then it's absolutely brilliant. Another example, and I actually have it right here, is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This one, people were expecting a cozy romance, and what it actually is, it's a folklore-driven romantic fantasy about survival, about beliefs, about identity, and it's brilliant. I love this book, but it's not a fantasy romance. You can't take away the romance from that book and nothing happens. The story is still beautiful. This one gets shelved as a romance sometimes, and it's not. It's a tragic love story based on the myth, and it's beautiful, it's brilliant, but it's not a romance. Another one, it's right here actually, is the Throne of Glass series, especially the first books. It turns into a romance, but it doesn't start like one because there are multiple love interests and there's no guaranteed payoff yet. So when people tell you that it's a fantasy romance, yes, but not at the beginning. None of these books are doing anything wrong. They are brilliant in and out of themselves. They are just not fantasy romance. They can be romantic fantasies, but they are not fantasy romance. And this is where the internet has a meltdown. A romance has two requirements. One, that the relationship is the plot, and two, that it has a happily ever after or a happily for now. Break one and the whole story falls down. A love story, though, it's much broader. The romance can matter deeply, but the point might be identity, the point might be grief, the point might be self-destruction, even. All romances are love stories, but not all love stories are romances. So why does this keep happening? Well, there are three main reasons. The first one is that romantasy became like the bucket for everything fantasy that might have a couple. But that's just a vibe, and the vibe doesn't tell you if you're getting a happily ever after or not. The second reason is that publishers want romance readers without the romance obligations. Romance readers are vocal, they are loyal, they buy fast, and they sometimes will buy things that are marketed as romance when they are not. What that does is that it breaks expectations. It makes us not trust the publishers as we did before. They want those sweet, sweet dollar romance without calling us for a second date. The third point is that sometimes readers conflate love stories with romance stories when they are not the same. A story can be deeply, deeply romantic without it being a romance story, because romance as a genre has a structure and rules, and ignoring that doesn't make the book more artistic, it just makes readers pissed. And if you're a writer, this distinction is everything, because it affects the structure, it affects pacing, it affects marketing, it affects the reader's trust. A fantasy romance has to feed the relationship constantly, while romantic fantasy has a little bit more freedom in that sense, but it requires honesty. And genre labels are not decoration, they are promises that you make to your readers, and the readers will riot if you break them. Jessica, how do I determine whether a story is a fantasy romance or a romantic fantasy? Well, there are some tips. First of all, read the Goodreads stats. If 900 people tagged it as an epic fantasy, but only 12 tagged it as a romance, then it's fantasy. Read the 3 stars reviews, because usually those readers tell the truth and can be more objective than the people who give it 5 stars or the people who give it 1 star. Another one is to read the back cover. If it's 90% about the war or the quest or the destiny and nothing about the romance, then the romance is just seasoning. And check the page count. If it's 700 pages and book 1 of, 7, that's fantasy first behavior. So here's a takeaway. Fantasy romance, romance first, happily ever after, expected. Romantic fantasy, fantasy first. Heartbreak, optional but expected. Check the labels. Essentially, don't read Gardens of the Moon if you're expecting big declarations of love. Do you prefer a guaranteed swoon, or are you emotionally reckless? Tell me in the comments. Which book lied to you? Mine was Catherine Arden's The Bear and the Nightingale. I absolutely love that book, but I definitely went in with the wrong expectations. Subscribe for more romance nerdery, and may your romance fantasy and your fantasy romance deliver the ending that you want and you deserve. Bye!